When the emergency room nurse handed me her phone, my vision was blurring and my chest was barely moving. I was dying. The surgeon had just told my family I might not survive the night, but when my mother's voice came through the speaker, there was no panic, no tears, just a cold, exasperated sigh. She said my accident was ruining the negotiations for Natalie's wedding menu. Have you ever felt like the invisible bank account in your own family? Drop a comment. Let me know where you are listening from and what time it is right now. I woke up 3 days later. The sterile hum of the Denver intensive care unit filled the space around me. Nurse Allison was adjusting my intravenous lines. I did not cry. I did not ask why. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my bruised eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only razor-sharp clarity. This was not an emotional breakdown. It was a balance sheet. I looked at Allison and calmly asked her to dial a secure number for my corporate attorney. The time for begging had ended. Now, it was time for an audit. To understand my immediate pivot to a legal severing, you have to understand the ledger of my life. I am 31 years old, the founder of a highly profitable tech startup. But to my mother, Cynthia, and my younger sister, Natalie, my title was simply the family automated teller machine. Natalie was 28, the golden child, fragile and endlessly demanding. Cynthia enabled her every whim, masking blatant financial abuse as family loyalty. Over the past 5 years, I had poured $150,000 into a joint emergency account for them. I had quietly cleared $85,000 of Natalie's accumulated luxury credit card debt to protect her credit score. And I was currently locked into a $110,000 auto draft scheduled to pay for Natalie's upcoming high-end wedding package. I was the silent investor in their twisted version of a family. People often ask why a smart, successful founder would let herself be bled dry for so long. They assume it is weakness or stupidity. But the truth is much darker. It is the invisible chain of the survivor, a deep, traumatic bonding. When you are the designated family scapegoat, you are conditioned from childhood to believe your only inherent worth is your utility. I did not fund their lavish lifestyles out of generosity. I was executing a trauma response. I was caught in a toxic cycle of learned helplessness, paying exorbitant financial ransoms in a desperate, invisible attempt to buy the unconditional maternal love that Cynthia freely showered onto Natalie. I convinced myself that if I just solved enough problems, paid enough bills, they would finally look at me and see a daughter, not a bank account. Lying in that hospital bed, my shattered ribs aching with every mechanical breath, the illusion completely evaporated. Love was not a transaction, and I had officially bankrupted my soul trying to purchase it. I realized that their family affection had always been a premium subscription, with me footing the bill. The realization was as cold and unrelenting as the Colorado blizzard raging outside the hospital window. My mother had looked at my near-death experience as a logistical inconvenience to a catering schedule. I asked Nurse Allison to hold the phone to my ear. My lawyer answered on the second ring. I took a shallow breath and began listing my instructions. Every word I spoke to, my lawyer was deliberate. There was no hesitation in my voice. I told him to pull every financial record, every joint account statement, and every contract associated with my name. I was no longer the dependable workhorse. I was the chief executive officer of my own life, reclaiming my assets. The hospital room felt different now. The smell of antiseptic was replaced by the scent of liberation. I was done being the invisible foundation holding up their house of cards. While my lawyer began drafting the necessary documents, my phone screen lit up on the bedside table. Nurse Allison propped it up so I could see. My chest burned with every shallow breath. My ribs were held together by surgical hardware, and my lungs were still recovering from the blunt force trauma of the multi-car pileup. Yet, my physical agony paled in comparison to the digital notification glaring at me. It was a text message from Cynthia. She did not ask if I was awake. She did not ask if my surgeries were successful. She did not ask if I was going to survive. Instead, the message read, "We are having a massive crisis. Natalie's Aspen wedding caterer is threatening to walk because the final menu changes require an immediate deposit, $1 or $20,000 to the vendor account. Right now, we cannot deal with your drama today." A few seconds later, A second notification popped up. Natalie had loved the text message. She had literally placed a heart icon on a demand for $20,000 while her sister lay broken in an intensive care unit. I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was breathtaking. To them, my multi-car collision in a brutal mountain blizzard was nothing more than an inconvenient delay in their payment processing. They were entirely devoid of remorse, empathy, or basic human decency. If there had been any lingering shred of guilt in my heart about what I was about to do, that text message eradicated it completely. They had just greenlit their own destruction. They were not treating me like a family member who was fighting for her life. They were treating me like a malfunctioning credit card terminal that needed a swift kick to spit out more cash. The cruelty was clinical, so my response would be clinical too. I did not text back. I did not try to explain my pain. I did not beg them to come visit me in Denver. Silence was the only appropriate answer to that level of toxicity. I closed my eyes and listened to the steady beep of the heart monitor. It was the sound of my life continuing, a life they clearly did not value. Nurse Allison looked at the screen, her face contorting with unmistakable disgust. She offered to turn the phone off, but I shook my head. "Let it stay on," I told her. "Let every message they send be a reminder of why I am doing this." I watched the snow swirling outside the window, matching the coldness settling permanently into my veins. For 22 years, I had believed that if I bled enough for them, they would eventually bandage my wounds. Now, I knew they would only complain that my blood was staining their designer shoes. The golden gravy train was about to derail, and they were the ones who had uncoupled the tracks. I turned my head back to my laptop screen. Every click of the mouse felt like a chain breaking. I was meticulously dismantling the financial infrastructure that supported their lavish existence. Cynthia thought she was sending a simple demand for $20,000. She had no idea she was actually sending the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. The blizzard outside was nothing compared to the storm I was about to unleash. The transition from emotional realization to professional execution was seamless. I was no longer an abused daughter. I was a tech founder isolating a critical vulnerability in my network. Over a secure phone line, I delivered my instructions to my corporate lawyer with absolute clinical precision. First, we targeted the most dangerous liability, my medical power of attorney. For years, Cynthia had held the legal authority to make healthcare decisions for me. The thought of that woman having the power to pull my life support while worrying about a wedding cake flavor turned my stomach. I ordered my lawyer to revoke Cynthia's medical power of attorney immediately, transferring all legal authority to a trusted, independent fiduciary. Next, I moved to the lifeblood of their borrowed luxury, the joint emergency account. I had personally deposited $150,000 into that account over the years, intending it to be a safety net for genuine crises. Cynthia treated it like her personal slush fund. I instructed my lawyer to legally freeze the joint account, seize the entire $150,000 balance, and transfer the funds directly into an untraceable private trust under my sole control. Then came the heaviest blow, the financial guillotine aimed directly at the golden child's perfect day. Natalie had booked a wildly extravagant wedding package in Aspen. I had already paid the initial deposit, but the remaining balance of $110,000 was scheduled to auto-draft from my corporate accounts that upcoming Friday. It was a massive, binding expenditure that they assumed was entirely secure. I told my lawyer to cancel the auto-draft immediately. But I did not stop there. I instructed him to invoke the force majeure and breach of contract clauses hidden deep within the vendor agreements. I officially canceled the entire $110,000 wedding package, ensuring that no funds would be released from my accounts. The beauty of the execution lay in its cold, legal transparency. Everything I did was airtight, documented, and entirely within my legal rights. I was not stealing, I was reclaiming. I was not acting out of malice, I was enacting strict financial boundaries. The contrast between my broken, bruised physical body lying in the hospital bed and the ruthless, unstoppable force of my financial severance created an immense sense of satisfaction. Nurse Allison helped me sign the digital documents using a stylus. My hand shook from the physical exertion, but my signature was bold and decisive. In less than an hour, I had completely dismantled the economic engine that powered Cynthia and Natalie's arrogance. They were currently shopping in high-end boutiques and yelling at caterers, completely oblivious to the fact that the floor had just vanished from beneath their feet. The legal severing was a masterpiece of corporate retaliation. I imagined the digital wires snapping one by one, disconnecting their luxurious reality from my hard-earned capital. There would be no warning calls, no arguments, and no opportunities for them to manipulate their way out of this. I was starving the parasite to save the host. My lawyer confirmed the transfers were complete, and the wedding vendors had been notified of the cancellation. The financial pipeline had officially run dry. Just as I thought the severance was complete, my lawyer called back. His tone was grim, stripping away the final layer of this family drama and elevating it into the realm of criminal fraud. He had been auditing the secondary contracts tied to Natalie's wedding and uncovered a lethal discovery. Cynthia and Natalie had not just felt entitled to my personal wealth, they had crossed a massive legal line. Without my knowledge, they had used my tech company's corporate tax identification number and forged my signature as a corporate guarantor to secure a dozen secondary luxury vendors across the state of Colorado. They had booked florists, luxury transport, and high-end spas, leveraging my company's pristine credit rating to float their extravagant demands. This was not just familial entitlement, it was corporate fraud. By pulling my primary funding and canceling the $110,000 auto draft, I did not just cancel a wedding. I triggered a cascading breach of corporate contract across the entire luxury vendor network. Because my lawyer formally notified these vendors that the corporate guarantees were forged and unauthorized, the blowback was immediate and catastrophic. In the elite, tight-knit world of high-end event planning in Aspen and Denver, word travels at lightning speed. These luxury vendors did not just cancel Natalie's secondary bookings, they retaliated. They circulated Cynthia and Natalie's names on an exclusive, statewide corporate blacklist. My mother and sister were officially flagged as fraudulent liabilities. They were permanently banned from booking any reputable, high-end venue, caterer, or event service in the state. I stared at the ceiling of my hospital room, letting the magnitude of their stupidity wash over me. This was the ultimate, devastating twist. They had handed me the exact weapon needed to destroy their social standing. If they had just used my personal credit cards, they would merely be broke. But by committing corporate forgery, they had publicly exposed themselves as con artists. My lawyer asked if I wanted to press criminal charges. I told him to hold off on the police, letting the financial and social ruin crush them first. The corporate blacklist was a far more elegant punishment. In their world, social status was oxygen. Being blacklisted by the elite vendors they so desperately wanted to impress would suffocate them completely. The revelation removed any lingering trace of hesitation I might have harbored. They had viewed my business as nothing more than a slush fund to exploit. They had risked my corporate integrity for floral arrangements and champagne fountains. The sheer arrogance required to forge a chief executive officer's signature demonstrated a sociopathic level of entitlement. My lawyer immediately dispatched cease and desist letters to the fraudulent vendors, explicitly detailing the forgery. The dominoes were falling. Their illusion of limitless wealth was violently colliding with the brick wall of legal accountability. They were no longer just ungrateful relatives. They were exposed frauds, stripped of their rented prestige. The trap was set, the accounts were drained, and their reputation was incinerated. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to walk blindly into the execution chamber they had built for themselves. The absolute peak of catharsis arrived on the 7th day. Through the hospital's security cameras, and recounted to me later by Nurse Allison, the final act played out with poetic perfection. Cynthia and Natalie strutted through the sliding doors of the Denver hospital. They had not come out of a sudden surge of maternal guilt or sisterly devotion. They had come because, 2 hours earlier, their premium credit cards had been brutally declined at a luxury mountain spa, and the wedding coordinator had emailed them the cancellation notice. Furious, panicked, and utterly convinced that I had made some terrible administrative error from my hospital bed, they marched down the sterile corridor. They were ready to unleash hell. They fully expected to burst into room 314 and scream at a weak, apologetic, broken version of me, demanding I fix their financial crisis immediately. Natalie shoved the heavy wooden door open, her designer handbag slung over her arm, a scowl twisting her face. Cynthia pushed in right behind her, her chest heaving with indignation. But the tirade died in their throats. Room 314 was completely silent. The heart monitors were powered down. The intravenous poles were bare. The bed was stripped down to the mattress, the sheets folded with sterile, military precision. There was no pale, injured tech founder waiting to beg for their forgiveness. I was already gone, securely transported to a remote, off-the-grid location. The only thing left in the room was a single, crisp white envelope resting exactly in the center of the bare mattress. Nurse Allison stepped into the doorway behind them, flanked by hospital security. She looked at my mother with cold, unmistakable disgust and informed them that I had been legally discharged. She then handed Cynthia the envelope containing the strict no-contact order and my final, handwritten note detailing their absolute financial and social ruin. As Cynthia tore open the envelope and read the words, the color violently drained from her face. Her knees buckled, and she had to grip the edge of the empty bed to keep from collapsing. Natalie let out a sharp, hysterical gasp as the reality of the corporate blacklist and frozen accounts set in. This is the phenomenon of the power illusion of an empty wallet. For years, Cynthia and Natalie had paraded around with immense arrogance, bullying service workers and looking down on others. But their entire social identity, their status, their supreme confidence, was merely borrowed. It was rented using my money. They possessed no inherent value, no actual wealth of their own. Stripped of my wallet, the illusion instantly shattered. Without my funding to prop up their grandiosity, their entire identity vaporized into absolute nothingness. They were just two exposed frauds standing in an empty hospital room. The silence in the empty room must have been deafening. They had walked in as queens of an artificial kingdom and were escorted out as bankrupt imposters. My note was merciless. I told them their credit limit had officially reached zero, their corporate forgery had been exposed, and they no longer had a daughter or a sister. I reclaimed my power the moment they realized they had absolutely none. 6 months have passed since that day in room 314. I am sitting by the massive stone fireplace in a remote, high-security luxury cabin in Aspen, watching the heavy snow fall across the mountain pines. I am completely off the grid, my remote tech company thriving, and my personal network impenetrable. I am entirely unreachable by the dozens of blocked burner phones my family still desperately tries to use to beg for money. Through mutual corporate contacts, I occasionally hear whispers of the avalanche of consequences that buried them. The fallout was absolute. Once the corporate blacklist became public knowledge within their elite social circles, Natalie's illusion of wealth completely collapsed. Her fiancé, realizing that her family's status was a fraudulent house of cards built on my stolen credit, abruptly canceled the engagement and left her. She lost the wedding, the groom, and her social standing in one devastating sweep. Cynthia fared no better. Stripped of my $150,000 joint account and drowning in the fraudulent debts they had accumulated, she was forced to sell her sprawling home. The woman who once scoffed at working-class people is now working a grueling minimum-wage retail job just to stave off bankruptcy. I hear Cynthia occasionally tries to play the victim, telling anyone who will listen that her wealthy, ungrateful daughter abandoned her. But the corporate blacklist tells the real story, and no one is buying her tears anymore. Surviving that brutal car accident gave me back my physical life, but executing that absolute financial severance gave me back my soul. Society constantly pushes the narrative that family is everything, that bloodlines demand unconditional forgiveness no matter how severe the abuse. But that is a toxic myth designed to keep victims trapped. Letting go of a toxic bloodline is not an act of cold revenge. It is the ultimate, necessary act of self-preservation. Blood only makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and how people treat you in your darkest moments are what actually make you family. Walking away from my abusers and leaving them to face the consequences of their own greed was the healthiest decision I have ever made. I did not lose a family. I escaped a financial hostage situation. Now, breathing the crisp mountain air, I finally know what it feels like to be completely free. My scars have healed, and my silence is peaceful. I've come to realize that true peace begins the moment you stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. For years, I carried the crushing weight of their expectations, believing my worth was tied to my wallet. But sitting here today, watching the sunrise over the Rockies, my heart feels remarkably light. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free. I forgive them for being broken people incapable of love, but I will never again allow them access to my life. I have finally found my own voice, my own worth, and a life built on genuine respect. If you were in my shoes, would you have left that note and walked away forever? Or given them one last chance to explain? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join our community for more powerful stories.